Hello, everyone. Today we're going to dive into two of the most critical components of the American government, the presidency and the federal bureaucracy. Now, these topics they're covered in chapters 12 and 15 of your text, and this is central to understanding how the executive power, which is the president, how the presidency is structured, how the president exercises its power, and how the presidency is controlled through a means of checks and balances that we have in our government. We're going to take a look at how the president gets its power and how that power has evolved over time and how a administrative state has grown throughout the years. And the administrative state is what carries out the laws of our nation. And the first thing we want to do is take a look at the origins of the executive branch. Now, to understand the presidency, we have to go back to look at its roots. Now, the first government that we discussed earlier, the Articles of Confederation, was intentionally weak and it didn't have a strong executive. It didn't have a president. And that's one of the reasons why that experiment ultimately failed, and it led to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, where they designed a new system. And when they designed that new system, they did create the presidency, and mainly because they felt that the country needed a type of energetic leadership, a figurehead, kind of like a CEO of a corporation that represents. And so they were also concerned about, well, if we have someone like that, we have to be concerned about the person's unchecked power to become a king, which, as we know, that's what they had previously fought and why the Revolutionary War happened. So they were very concerned about one figurehead having a lot of power. So they developed a solution, which was a system of checks and balances. And it was used to keep the executive power in check. And so the president, as stated in Article 2, Section 1, states the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. So in the Constitution, that's where the president ultimately gets its power. And yeah, they did want someone like that, a commander in chief, but not sure if they imagine how powerful the president has become over the course of time. Now, the Article 2 gives president certain powers, as you see on the right. They're the commander in chief. They're the commander in chief of the armed forces, and that's something to keep in mind. The president has the power to make treaties with other nations and to give appointments within his cabinet. The president also has the authority to veto legislation that Congress approves. The president also vocalizes his intentions and also some of his successes in the State of the Union address. And also the president can also grant pardons. So, well, how do we choose our president? Well, it's a multi-stage process. It begins with primaries and caucuses. And this is where parties select their nominees. And then there's a general election. And this is what you want to keep in mind is that you do not directly vote for a president. You vote for electors that are pledged to a candidate. And this is called the Electoral College system. And it gives each state a number of electors equal to its congressional representation. Okay. Now there are 538 total electors, and they're equal to the House plus the Senate plus 3 for Washington, D.C. And as I stated, you need 270 elector votes, no, electors to win. And that's where you get a majority. And ultimately, it is the popular vote within the state that gives the electoral votes to the candidate. And that's where most states award all the votes to the plurality winner. In other words, if you win the popular vote within that state, you get all of the electoral votes that that state has. And we have Wisconsin, that is, we have 10 electors. And so yeah, whoever wins Wisconsin, they will get 10 electors. And if you look at the map on the right, kind of gives you an idea of how the politics are spread throughout our country. Now, what happens if a president commits a crime? Now, the Constitution provides a removal mechanism, and it's called impeachment. And impeachment by the House and convictions by a 2/3 vote in the Senate. So impeachment has to actually start in the House of Representatives. Then after it's voted on and it passes in the House, then it has to go to a Senate where you actually have to get 2/3 of a vote in the Senate. It's, the 12th Amendment also, it's a key reform. It separates the presidential and the vice presidential ballots to prevent the kind of, well, gridlock that we've seen in the election of 1800s. And that's where the 12th Amendment comes from. President has many roles and wears many hats. A lot of responsibilities. And first, as the chief executive, the president is responsible for enforcing the laws passed by Congress, overseeing the vast federal bureaucracy. Now, as chief diplomat, the president directs foreign policy, negotiates treaties, and represents the U.S. in the world stage. And as of lately, that's been quite the busy executive that we have in the Oval Office right now, actually making an incredible purchase of Greenland, negotiating a purchase of Greenland. The president also is the commander in chief, and that makes the president the supreme commander of the military. And a lot of people debate that power, but it's enshrined. It's a power given to the commander in chief. And as a chief legislator, the president plays a key role in shaping the legislative agenda, proposing budgets, and using the veto power to influence lawmaking. Transition and appointments. Now, when a president comes into office, there is a transitional period where he has to fill up his cabinet and his staff. Okay, and there's two different ways that he fills that up. Now, the cabinet positions, they have to get a Senate confirmation. And so there's hearings, and maybe you've seen them where they'll question them and question their past, question their philosophy, and yes, they have to be confirmed by the Senate. And there are 15 departments that that have this where they have to get confirmed, and they usually are the heads of these departments called secretaries, and the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, Treasury, and Justice. As you see, those are just four. Those are actually inner cabinet. They have priority access to the president. And all these heads, they advise the president, and they also lead the major agencies. They are the administrator, the top administrator in these agencies. And the White House staff, you don't need a Senate confirmation for these for his staff, and that's considered the West Wing, and these are the closest advisors to the president. And it's considered the chief of staff. The chief of staff is considered the gatekeeper and controls access and manages the schedule. And then you have the press secretary who you see on a daily basis addressing the media. And she, at the present time, is the spokesperson for the president. Also, the National Security Advisor doesn't have to have a confirmation, and that's the person who advises on foreign affairs and security. And if you look at the bottom, it tells you how many positions the president has to fill up. Makes over 4,000 appointments, and about 1,200 require Senate approval. So you see the transition is pretty busy period where there's a lot of people who are changing from the old administration to the new. Now, let's take a look at the president's powers and how the president puts them into action. We'll start on the left with the military. As commander in chief, the president has the ultimate authority over the armed forces and represents principle of civilian control over the military. Now, in the legislative arena over in the middle, most of his power is in the veto, but they also drive the national agenda through the State of the Union address. And well, one of the things to pay attention to is that all those appointments, they all happen within the first 100 days, and this is popularized by Franklin D. Roosevelt, and it's kind of become a period of time, kind of a benchmark for measuring a new president's effectiveness. And it kind of gives a measure of whether they have the will to push their policy and to be effective, to make change. Okay, so executive orders. Now, this is one of the most powerful tools that a president has, and it's also one of the most controversial. A president has, and that is the executive order. And these are directives, and they do have the force of law, but they do not require congressional approval, and that's where the controversy comes in, especially when it comes to military action. And there's been a lot of criticism over the years that the executive branch has misused the executive order, especially when it comes to foreign affairs. But they have used executive orders a lot with domestic issues as of the last 10 to 15 years. And presidents have used them a lot. And times when they want to act really quickly for emergencies, sometimes when Congress is gridlocked, they'll try to bypass Congress to get certain policies passed. And they kind of justify this by saying that it's the president's duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And some people say the criticism has been they've gone beyond that with the executive orders. Now, we talked about judicial review a couple weeks ago, and that is the ability of the Supreme Court to be able to rule laws that Congress pass as unconstitutional. Well, the same applies for executive orders. There can be a judicial review on a president's executive order, and the Supreme Court can decide whether that executive order violates the Constitution. And however, it can be a back and forth. It has been a back and forth over the years where a Supreme Court can overturn executive orders. However, a new president could start that over again, that process over again, because it's not permanent. But they are very temporary, executive orders, and they're meant to be temporary. And that's one of the key insights is that they are powerful, but they lack the durability of legislation. Legislation that's passed by Congress, it stands, but executive orders, they're very temporary. Now let's discuss the federal bureaucracy, and this is the engine that implements all of our laws. And there's four types of organization. First, we have cabinet departments, and they consist of the Department of State and Treasury, and those are probably the most visible. And then we have independent executive agencies like the CIA, NASA, and the EPA. See those as examples. They report directly to the president, but have more specialized missions. Third, you have the regulatory agencies like the SEC and the Federal Reserve, and they're designed to actually try to be insulated from politics and to regulate certain parts of the economy. And then we have government corporations, and they act as businesses, kind of, they call them quasi-business enterprises. And they're corporations like the post office and Amtrak. They provide services mainly to the public, and they have to operate just like a business that is providing service. Now, how does the president manage all of this bureaucracy? Well, it's through a mechanism called the Office of Management and Budget. And that's the mechanism where the executive branch reviews budgets, reviews regulations, and reviews agency performances. And that's where the possibility of holding some of these agencies accountable, holding some of the heads of these agencies accountable also. And the president has made changes over the course of time based on being able to have this type of power of review. And this includes having control over appointments, being able to place loyalists in top agencies positions as much as possible, but have an ability to control them to make sure that those policies that are favorable to the president gets realized. And executive orders are also one of the tools that gives the president the power to direct agencies on how to actually implement policy. And president can also be a reorganizer, conduct reorganization, and that's actually what has been going on for the last year or so, is that our president is reorganizing some parts of the government, shifting agency structures and merging departments that will better align with the administration's priorities, and that's exactly what's happening. And I first started off saying, letting you know that the founding fathers were concerned about the president's power. Well, here are some of the checks that they installed from the start. Now, the institutional checks that we talked about include judicial review, which gives the Supreme Court the power to declare laws passed by Congress as unconstitutional, but also presidential actions as unconstitutional. And they list Hamdan versus Rumsfeld, and that was in 2006, where some of the actions of Donald Rumsfeld and that administration over in Iraq was not constitutional as far as holding enemy combatants against policy, and it was a rebuking of the whole administration and the whole Iraq war and everything that was involved in it, including Afghanistan. Actually, I believe this was Afghanistan. It might be my mistake, but both with Iraq and Afghanistan, there was a lot of um, misconduct, and that's when the media did a pretty good job of highlighting this misconduct that was going on overseas, in both Iraq and in Afghanistan. And I think it woke a lot of people up at that time, and maybe this is what led to also um, being held accountable in 2006. There was a lot of public outcry about Iraq, about Afghanistan. After 9/11, a lot of people got caught up in kind of the hysteria and the fear. But then by the time 2006 came, a lot of people realized that, yeah, the Bush administration had abused their power based on 9/11. And Hamdan versus Rumsfeld is one of the prime examples. Okay. Now, congressional oversight. The committees, they investigate the executive branch. They have government accountability audits. Yes. And so the executive branch, although they're setting budgets, setting priorities, you have government accountability offices that can conduct audits to make sure that everything is according to policy, according to protocol. You also have the power of the purse, where Congress controls the budget and can refuse to fund presidential initiatives and agencies. And those are the institutional checks, but there's also political and structural checks. One is public opinion, where the president is always concerned about approval ratings. Okay, it gives him the ability to influence Congress, because Congress can point to a low approval rating as a reason why they don't feel obligated to push forward the president's priority or agenda. There's also term limits, and that's in the 22nd Amendment. You can only get 2 terms as president. And there's also media scrutiny, where investigative journalists, watchdogs, and whistleblowers, they can hold the executive branch accountable, and sometimes whistleblowers can hold some of these agencies accountable from um, committing fraud, misdeeds, and well, just general corruption. And so there's also whistleblower protections that we have for those who step forward and tell us about fraud. And we'll go into that right now. And it's part of one of the accountability mechanisms. And the Senate confirmation, and that's one of the accountability mechanisms. A lot of these appointments, the president can't just put anyone in there. They have to be scrutinized, they have to go before congressional hearings, they have to get voted on. Again, the power of the purse. Congress controls funding, can limit the power of the president by refusing to fund its initiatives. And last, the whistleblower protection. And these laws, they protect civil servants who want to expose waste, fraud, and abuse within a bureaucracy. And this gives us accountability without fear of retaliation. And that's part of the Whistleblower Protection Act of 1989. Excuse me. In conclusion, this is part of the American system of balancing the power between these three branches. And the executive power, it's a balancing act, and it's intentionally so. They created this system of checks and balances, and it's designed to create tension, and it's designed to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. It's not perfect, but like I said, it's a tension. It's intentionally tensious. Now the power of the presidency has evolved, but it still remains constrained by law, by Congress, the public, and by the Supreme Court. And the federal bureaucracy, it's the vehicle for government action for how things have to be done. But it does also have its ability to be held accountable. There's oversight for the bureaucracy also. It has to remain effective. It has to remain democratic. It has to remain ethical. And we'll end by a quote by James Madison, who wrote in Federalist number 51, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. And this is a principle that has to remain with us